Hello and welcome to the Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented Conference of 2024. I'm Dr. Letha Millman. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Until then, take the paperclip challenge. On your own, write down as many different ways as you can to use a paperclip. If you're doing this on your own, then I highly encourage you to pause this and take at least 2 minutes to come up with as many ideas as you can. If you run out of ideas in that 10 minutes, flip your paper over, pick another object that is around you, combine that with your paperclip, and keep going. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, I am Dr. Letha Millman. I am a 7th and 8th grade language arts teacher at Eaton Middle School, and I'm also responsible for those gifted and talented students within language arts. I also adjunct in the University of Wyoming and at University of Northern Colorado. The paperclip study came from 1968 when George Land and Beth Jarman were asked to devise a test for NASA engineers to test their creativity. One of the things they were looking at if their creativity when they became an adult was the same. So they knew, hey, this is a kid we should watch. So they looked at 1,600 3 to 5-year-olds. They retested them at the age of 10 and again at 15. And then they talked to 280,000 adults whose average age was 31. Now, I'd like you to take a minute, pause the video if you are watching online, and decide which age group met these genius level percentages. So 30% of this age group was a genius level, 98% was a genius level, 2% was at genius level, and 12% was at genius level. All right, now look at this. Go back to your paperclip that you wrote down and decide where are you at with your imaginative IQ. Are you a genius? That's where our 3 to 5-year-olds, 98% of them could create 200 or more things that could be created with a paperclip. That many uses for it. By the time we reach 10 years old, we're to 30%. 15-year-olds is about 12%. And we adults, we could create 10 to 15 ideas. Only 2% of us are geniuses. Why is there this decline? Our purpose is to provide you with instructional toolbox and strategies which promote passion, exploration, and purposely ignite creativity and purposeful learning. My objectives include explaining the importance of purposefully meeting the needs of our students, providing examples which support learners' passion, provide creativity building skills and ideas which you can implement into your classroom right away. Our agenda, we're going to briefly talk about why the decline in genius status, our GT needs, and what is our issue with school. We're going to talk about unlearning, divergent learning, depth of knowledge, transformative learning experiences, and then, of course, have an idea exploration. So why is there this decline? Well, the answer is our adult brain. Our adult brains have been trained to take out the creativity. What happens is we have this convergent thinking, which is the ability to make a decision and get the right answer. And we do this through learning the game of school and work. When does it start? Well, looking at the data, looking at what we just talked about, it starts as soon as we start school. Teachers are trying to accommodate gifted students, and many of them just give them more work to make up for that lack of time, that inability to work with them one-on-one, which actually it doesn't stimulate them or challenge them. This is particularly true for our gifted students, and it's true for the rest of our world. So all of our students are overloaded with work. They're not actually getting an education that is stimulating or that is deep. Here's what my students said, that they could do the hard work. It's boring, but we can do the extra work. We need help being organized, learning to work together, structure, and time to explore our interests. This was the 7th grader that I talked to last year. When I talked to them again this year, because I happen to have 7th and 8th grade, I asked them about this and he said, well, we really don't need more work. What we need is to work harder. So I pushed back on this and said, okay, define what harder means. And he said, harder means it needs to be engaging, it needs to keep our interest, and we need to explore deeper or longer. I'd love to have your comments on this since we're not face-to-face and you're listening to this. Would you please add in the comments below, what do you think your students would add, or what do you know that your students would add? What do our students need? Our solution for this, well, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. If our problem started with our traditional idea of school, where we're just giving information and giving more work, hoping that they will get engaged and learn, we have to change that. How do we do that? Well, we unlearn. The question is how to learn, unlearn, and relearn together to think creatively. This is by Totanva in 2020. My suggestion is that you go back. When you were small, playing was learning, exploration was learning, failure was learning. Nobody ever got a baby that was learning to walk, and the first time they fell down said, "That's it, sit down, you're never going to learn to walk. Just give up right now." No, we came in and we supported that baby and we cheered them on for trying. We lifted them back up, we set them back out and had them do it again and again and again because failure is part of learning. The other piece that we're missing is that imagination. That was part of learning. All of these things, exploring the world around us, that was part of learning. So it's time for us to go back and add some of that back into our schooling. Let me give you an example of this. I love to revisit childhood because it is so beneficial to my students. One of the ways I do this is through children's books. They give this sense of nostalgia because they remember the books and the stories. They're already connected to it because it's something they've been studying and reading maybe for years and years. So there's also this sense of psychological safety. It's easy for them to understand. They may not understand all the words, because if you've ever read a children's book, you might remember that there are some really hard words in there that they just might not understand. But they understand it enough and they're familiar enough and comfortable enough that they don't have to focus on those words. They can focus on whatever skill or task I'm asking them to do. As you can see on my slide, there's some pretty deep things we're asking them to do. Very critical thinking is another thing I love to do with them and pick it apart. The other thing I love about it is they have these aha moments because it's something they're familiar with. But as a child, they weren't looking for hidden meanings. They weren't looking for a connection to the world. They were looking for entertainment. And so when they reread these things as a now wiser reader, they have these beautiful little aha moments as they put together all the pieces and understand the depth and the complexity of a child's book. I also love using picture books for this reason because they don't need to read. This takes away that anxiety for people with dyslexia, somebody whose language is not English as a first language. We can look at those picture books and do some very complicated tasks, such as inferring. That is a skill that is really hard for a lot of students. But if I give them this childhood exploration and book that they're already familiar with, it builds this sense of intelligence and this feeling of, I can do this. So, how do we get rid of this adult brain, this convergent thinking? Well, let's talk just a minute about what that is. It is our choice making and our discernment. It's ability to give the correct answer, which, if you're looking for the correct answer, means you only have one answer. It's a very realistic answer. It uses logic to narrow down these ideas. And this is according to Guilford in 1961. Now, I'm not saying this is not an important skill, it's an incredibly important skill. What I'm asking and saying is let the world teach this skill. Let everybody else teach this skill because what they also need is divergent thinking, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Because this convergent thinking is going to happen naturally as they're manipulating their knowledge and as they're learning to piece things together. Convergent thinking happens. What we need to practice is divergent thinking. This is that genius brain that we need to increase. It's the ability to devise novel approaches to problem solving. This is things such as brainstorming, it has endless possibilities. It's very flexible. This is also from J.P. Guilford in that 1961 Three Faces of Intellect. So how do we do this? Oh, it gave you the whole thing. So I was going to ask you what 1 plus 1 is. 1 plus 1 is 2. That is what everybody knows that it is. We learned that very early on. However, if you can look back, you can see here 1. Here's my plus sign, this orange, plus here's another 1, actually equals a window. And when I show this to my students on their first day, their little minds are generally blown and they really don't know quite what to think about me. That's okay. I'm pretty used to that at this point. But I do occasionally have students who come back, such as this year, this darling little girl came back to me and said, Miss Melman, I see that 1, this pink line here, plus is the yellow line here, 1, that blue line, equals a shovel. And she had those green lines drawn a little lower and thought she was going to tell me it was an arrow. When she explained that that was a shovel because that was the handle that you could push on, I thought, yeah, you're absolutely right. So 1 plus 1 equals 2, except when it doesn't. This is just a simple little skill that you can practice your divergent thinking. So how do we build a creative classroom? The first thing that we need to do is make it safe to fail. Can't get this video to play for you, so I'll link it in the comments below. This is from Meet the Robinsons, and this little boy has made all these inventions, and they always fail spectacularly. And as he is traveling through his little life, he meets a family who is very creative and fail all the time. And instead of telling him he's not worth anything because he failed, they actually have a celebration, and he's totally confused about it. But the message is that he can keep moving forward because failing is part of the environment. It's part of learning. And in our classrooms, we need to build that, this idea that failure is not failure. It's just one possibility. It's not a definitive solution. We can work again. We can look at it and try again. We do that by embracing learning through exploration. We engage in playful learning, and we practice that divergent thinking skill. I heard once somebody say that they have pies every time that they fail. I'd have to eat too many pies, so that's not a great idea for me. But the idea behind it, of that we celebrate our failures, maybe you have a pie for your worst ones, or for me it would be ice cream because I like that more than pie, but same idea. So our friend Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb after 1,000 tries, taught us that I haven't failed. I've just found 990 ways that won't work. If we take that attitude and embrace that as a true part of who we are, we will never fail because we won't give up. How do we teach that creativity and passion in our classroom? Well, we model it. We use our passions. My husband and I were looking to go on a trip with two of our children. He wanted to go to Paris because he loves it, and the kids were excited to go there. We saw that there were these flights over and over that were going to Iceland, and they stay there for about 24 hours as a layover. So we were trying to decide, well, is there anything worth going to Iceland for? My husband during COVID found these really, really dirt cheap flights, so we went. Turns out there's a lot to be passionate about in Iceland. One of the things I became passionate about are puffins. I learned that in one of their small towns, they actually go out at night and save the baby puffins and throw them over a cliff. At first I read that and thought, why would you do that? That doesn't seem like saving them. Well, it turns out that puffins follow the moon, and so to follow the moon, they jump off a cliff. And that's how they learn to fly and how they learn to get on their own. Our townspeople found out that the puffins would follow the light of their town, and instead of learning to fly and go toward the moon to migrate, they would get lost in their town and then they would die. So it actually is very kind of them to go save them and throw them off a cliff. So now I'm passionate about this and I would like to go and join in that. Then I invite my students. I provide opportunities for them to be the expert, for them to share their passions, to put their passions into the things that we do daily. Let me talk to you about universal passions, because this is something that is complicated. We want them to use that to fuel their learning. How do we do that? How do we work on passions when we have individuals we're worried about, and a community, and classes, and are there even universal passions? How can we implement them into our learning? Let me give you some examples. So one that I found that is fairly universal is food. Now, not everybody likes the same food, but food is pretty universal. When I walked into class last year, I was told the eighth graders, they hate poetry, hate it. It's a little sad for me because I kind of like poetry. But what I thought about is, well, I know what they do like. They like food. In particular, they like cookies, which works out great because I have a universal passion, which is also food. So I took this idea of poetry with one of their passions, which was cookies, and made a cookie poetry smash. And it worked great. We are going to go into this a little bit later, so I'm going to skip for now, but just know that food works pretty good. Another universal passion is me. Everybody loves to talk about ourselves. We have to do a lot of writing in language arts and a lot of essays, and the kids were pretty much overwhelmed. They were done with writing. They didn't want to do it anymore. And I still had lots that I had to have them do. We were working on argumentative essays, so I said, hey, there's a dance coming up. Please write me an argumentative essay on why you are the best date to the dance. My GT kids, I had them go a step further. Not only did they have to write that, they had to find research that stated what makes a good date and explain that and share that with the other students. And then I had them go even one step farther and write that in the third person. So they're not using any personal pronouns. Everybody else was allowed to use kind of an opinionated argumentative essay with limited use of personal pronouns. They'd have some citations. The hardest, or that extra little piece of work, was my GT students, because I was pushing them. They already knew how to do those things. Their skill was taking it from a persuasive, opinionated paper to an argumentative essay. The next one is laughter or humor. We don't get to use this in class all the time. And of course, if we used it all the time in everything we did, it would become mundane. But adding that little bit of laughter or human drives on that personal passion, which is we like to have fun. We like to laugh. I used a ton of different activities and a lot of different classes. I incorporated art. I had technology. I had language arts, PE, math, music, social studies. I don't know, maybe even more than that. What we did is we had a drag race for the outsiders. We had to talk about social studies because we were talking about the types of cars that they would have had. What could they afford if they were a greaser or a Soch? We were talking about the era that they were in versus the cars from nowadays and what they would have. And immediately we had to create some serious problem solving skills. So we had a set amount of boxes for all of our classes. The other eighth grade teacher wound up calling in sick. And so their boxes were only taken to first hour. At the end of first hour, their boxes were gone. So immediately those students were trying to problem solve. Is there anything they could design for today and find another box? Could they find another box at home? Maybe they could use paper. As you see, you can see this young gentleman here in the yellow and this lady up here in the paper that goes clear up over her head. They problem solved by using paper to create a car. This young man in the black that's turned sideways went down to the tech lab and designed and 3D printed a car so that he would have one to race. The other thing that they had to solve was their cars kept falling apart. We had duct tape, we had tape, they had staplers, paper plates, string, and then they had to pick one person to wear it and how are they going to wear it. And so you'd see the kids racing up and down the halls and practicing things. And when they'd fall off, we'd have these debriefs like, what worked? Why did it work? Why did it not work? And what could we do better? And the kids came every day with different ideas on what they could do. We had just a couple days that they worked on these cars. I wish I had a picture, but there were some who had multiple people in a car. Others brought music and technology that gave it lights, and so they would play that. The best part was taking these pictures and watching the video because these little cars totally fell apart, some of them. It was just hilarious. And they continued to race because that was fun for them. But they learned a lot, and those creative problem solving skills and that deep thinking that we're looking for was there because they were passionate. They were passionate about their car that they created. Some of them were very passionate about winning. Some of them were just passionate about whatever color they picked, but it became their passion, which was super exciting. Another universal passion is autonomy, that ability to choose and to govern yourself. This takes some setting up in the front. I talk to them all the time about, hey, if you want to self-govern, then you have to follow the rules, and we set those up together. Some ways that you can do this are listed here: choice boards, creative learning contracts where you and they work together to specify goals and expectations. You have interest centers that are based on the student interests, and then they get to explore those somewhat at their own pace. Again, that convergent learning has to jump in because we only have a set amount of time. We can do peer teaching. We have various challenge levels, the idea of a low floor and a high ceiling, and how do we get them all throughout that range. Peer teaching, inquiry-based learning with open-ended questions and guided research, using technology, helping them learn a new skill. Really comes down to what is it that they really need to know? Focus on that, and then you let the rest go. Let me show you the 3 things that I focus on. Every day, the one thing that matters for me is, do they know that I love them? Even our meeting today, do you know that I care about you as an educator? That I'm trying to give you tools that will help you because I care. I care about our students and I care about you. And I don't want you sitting at home all night going, oh, how do I get these kids to learn? I've been there. It is not fun. The other thing I want them to know is that learning can be fun and enjoyable. Fun is the word they use. I would prefer enjoyable because it doesn't necessarily have to be fun. And it's not always enjoyable. However, it can be. And that's one of the key takeaways for me. The third thing is that they are confident when they leave my class that they can find the answers because they have the skills to do so. All of the state standards, all of the requirements for my school fall behind these. If I have to let go of something for the day, it's going to be those. Now, of course, I have to hit those things, but really my goal at the end of the day is that they know that I love them, period. That's it. Everything else can fall away. But as I hit these other things, it makes them excited. It brings in their passions, and we have no problem hitting those other skills and requirements because it's all incorporated into our learning style. So I would encourage you to decide what matters to you. And in each assignment, what matters and what can you let go of. Here's some ideas from easy and free autonomy. Seating is my favorite of these because it works really, really well. I talk to them all the time about, hey, if you want to sit with your friends during free work time today, you have to have your assignments done. That was the agreement that we came upon at the beginning of our year. It is amazing how quickly they will get things done and how fast they look to see if things are missing. And the quality of work has to have meet an expectation because we set that up as well. But man, it's impressive. If you want to get your work done, talk to these kids about their seating choices, particularly at that middle school, high school level where friends are super important to them. You can work on lighting, music, your topics, chosen goals or objectives or activity. Asking for the input is huge. Students like to give you input and feedback, and they're pretty open and honest about it. And then allowing them to decorate whatever your project is. A lot of them really love to do that. Now, you know your students, you know your abilities, and you know what you can do with your time. So look through these two lists and decide what is one thing that you could implement or try. As we're teaching, we want to make sure that we're not just giving them chocolate covered broccoli. We don't want something that is the surface level, looks good, but if you bite into it, it's not what you expected. You're not getting anything delicious and it's not going to stay with you. Actually, that terrible memory of eating chocolate covered broccoli that's not what we want. We want them to have a good experience so that they want to keep coming back. There are several ways to do this. Bloom's taxonomy is pretty popular. Norman Webb's depth of knowledge, this is a good one because what we're looking at is there are all these levels and they're all good and we can use them all. The one that evaluates and gives us the deepest cognitive complexity of a task is DOK, or depth of knowledge level 4, which is extended thinking. For us, we want them to make those connections. We want them to critique. We want those problem solving skills. And when they're passionate about those things, they begin to do that naturally. And so DOK level 4, I always try to make sure I have at least one assessment per unit that hits this, or that we're hitting at least one piece of that as often as possible, because I want it to be with them so that they can take those skills with them, even if they don't remember the exact lesson plan that I wanted them to try, that objective. There's a great book along with this called The Gifted Guild's Guide to Depth and Complexity. And one of the things they talk about is not layering new on new. So this is that idea that I talked about in the beginning of going back to childhood or using a book that they're already comfortable with. I'm not trying to teach them two new things. I'm not teaching them big hard words and giving them a text they've never seen before. The other piece of this is they have a bunch of different ideas of ways that you can incorporate this depth and complexity, and you can focus on all these variety of things and show this to the students. I'm only going to touch on one. I know there's other classes on this, and you now have the tools. You know what it's called. You can go look this up and explore it and become passionate about it if you want to. So one of them is teaching with different perspectives. So a question from that unit would be, can you explain why a particular character felt a particular way? I could use this with our book, The Outsiders, and say, hey, how would the book change, the storyline change, if the perspective came from a Soch instead of a greaser? How would it change if it was from the perspective of an inanimate object, such as a car? Would they care? Would it change? Would it matter if it was the Soch's car versus a greaser's car, or an adult's car versus a student's car? Looking at those different perspectives may change the story. These are questions. The nice thing about them is their questions are deep enough that one, they can't Google it. It's got to come from their own brain. And two, they're going to have to think about it. In fact, the idea here is that they have to put the pencil down to think about it before they can start writing. So there really is that moment of reflection and that moment of critical thinking skill being built. Another option for this, and what I hope happens when we have those deep knowledge, is transformative learning experiences. Pugh, who actually teaches over here at UNC, says a transformative learning experience is a learning episode in which a student acts on the subject matter by using it in everyday experience to more fully perceive some aspect of the world and find meaning in doing so. It embraces three characteristics of the Deweyan theory of experience. One, acting on your idea, which means you're engaging with your concepts or ideas that you've learned. Two, you're experiencing the expansion of perception. So again, oh, I see it worked here. Can it work here? Taking ideas through another perspective, another lens, if you will. And then three, developing a value for the content and the experience that it affords and gives you. This to me makes the most sense in cooking because that's probably the first transformative learning experience I understood I had. So if you look at cooking, you see this in all kinds of things. The first one for me was math. Let's say I had a pizza. There were 8 people in my family. Now there's 9. The rule growing up was if you cut it, you get the last piece. So it's really important to me that I had fractions. I wanted everybody to have an equal piece. And so I would take the whole and cut the whole into 8 equal pieces. Well, let's say I have 8 people in my family. Well, there are 24 people in my class and I am baking cookies. I need to make sure I have enough for 24 students and 8 people at home if I want to. If I only want one, then I guess I can make it one less. So how am I going to take my recipe that only makes 24 cookies? Am I going to double that? How many will give me and how much extra? What do I do with those extra? Or how can I divide those into smaller portions so that I can have enough for all of my people? Language arts, as we see this in that need for attention to detail and those reading skills. When I'm baking, if I add the wrong ingredients, my whatever I'm making is not going to turn out right. Sometimes that's a happy accident. I mean, that's how we got chocolate chip cookies, is they ran out of an ingredient. It's how we learned about chocolate actually in general, is they accidentally left the machine running too long and it made this delicious smooth chocolate that we now enjoy. Social studies is important to me because I learned where those ingredients come from. I love cocoa and I like to bake with it. Well, when I was traveling overseas, I learned that America does not have the best cocoa. And Belgium has great cocoa. France has great cocoa. So what I learned is I bring home some of that with me. And when I'm making something for me or for somebody that is going to really enjoy that difference, I use that good cocoa. And when I'm making something for a bunch of teenagers who don't care one way or the other, I use American cocoa because they don't care. This idea of the chemical reaction, I love this one because it happens in baking all the time. One of my favorite popcorn recipes is a candied popcorn. And one of the things it says is, okay, this is our science experiment and we should make it every day because we're going to have our vanilla and our baking soda. And when they combine, there's a chemical reaction. And when it combines, then you see this explosion of bubbles. Another one that my kids often use is yeast. When you combine those two things, you have this chemical reaction. And they'll talk to me about the change that they learned in school and what it is and why it's doing it. And you see this science experiment here with the balloon and the water. You also see like Coke and Mentos. They're testing it. Is that true? That critical thinking of who says that's right? Who is the one that gets to say that this happens all the time? I have to learn that for myself. Let me give you another 2 examples. My sister is an engineering major, or was back in the day, and one night she was on a date at CSU here in Colorado. She and this guy went out to dinner and they were walking around campus, and she came home and she was so excited, and she's telling me all about this date, and she says, we had the best time. We saw this crane and we were learning about velocity in our classroom, and we calculated the velocity of a crane, and it was the best date ever. And I just looked at her and thought, we have to get you on more dates. That sounds terrible to me. But I'm not a math person. For her, this was wonderful. And she had a great time and he had a great time. In fact, they went on multiple dates. But this was a transformative experience. They took what they were learning, saw something out in the world where they were, and implemented it to test it. Give you another example. That same sister wanted to broaden her horizons. So she took a music class. In this class, they had to write a song. Well, she's not very musically inclined and she didn't know how to write a song, and it was super frustrating to her. But she was learning about algorithms in her math classes. So she wrote an algorithm that would output data, which became musical notes. Now, while I am probably never going to be a person that writes an algorithm to get a song, I now have this knowledge that was actually transformative to me because I'd never thought about using an algorithm to create music. But look at it cross-pollinating, look at it doing all these things. She totally had a transformative experience. She was frustrated, needed a solution, pulled on the knowledge she had, and wrote this song for her class. I'd like you to take a few minutes and process which tactics we're using. Remember that poetry unit that I was talking to you, that cookie poetry smash. If you're looking at the screen here, we have a list of tactics: the unlearn, going back or using childhood, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, safe to fail environment, a creative environment, autonomy, passion exploration, cross-pollination, research, depth of knowledge, and transformative learning experiences. Let me walk you through this unit and you can think about which ones are used here. First thing that we did is we talked about a poem, and it was just about a cookie. I found one, showed it to them and said, hey, look, this is a free verse poem, did a little bit of explaining. And then I had them write their own. And I explained that they were writing about any of their favorite cookie. And if they don't like cookies, then they were writing about their favorite dessert. I didn't have any who don't like dessert, but if they did, then they would talk to me about their favorite food, or maybe one that they used to like and they don't like anymore. But everybody chose a cookie, which worked out really easy for me. I explained to them, hey, we're going to do this cookie poetry smash at the end. You're going to be displaying your favorite poem. We're going to read poems. You're going to vote on your favorite poem because we'll have a little competition. And then we're going to eat a lot of cookies. Now, there's a lot of buy-in for them when I say you get to eat cookies. The bonus became you can involve your community or your school. Our experience was that people became so excited because my students were so excited that other people were hearing about it. I had other teachers and I had other parents. I had students outside of my classes giving me poems and excited about this process. This year, since that was our first year and we kind of came together quickly, this year we're actually going to expand that and invite that community to join us. At the event, we actually had them vote and people won either a giant box of cookies, and then the top person won a crumble cookie, which is huge out here. And the kids were just, oh, it's the best thing ever. So a couple bucks, a cookie, life is good. They love poetry now. Part of that introduction, we had a Poetry Madness Week, similar to March Madness with the brackets. So we started with something like 62 poems. Every group of 2 students had 2 poems that they read, and then they would choose one, and it would go down the brackets until we got to the end, and they would pick one winning poem at the end, and that became like our poem. And they weren't all about cookies, actually. This one was about things they were interested in, things from their childhood, poems that I liked, some of Robert Frost and some of our big poetry epic writers. I included some of them. One of our biggest books last year that got traded around the school was Tupac's poetry book because it was unexpected and they knew who he was. So sometimes just throwing in random things like that sparks some interest and that little bit of passion. The next thing that we did was sprinkle in some fun and some silly examples. Mad Lib style poetry creation, where you pull out all the nouns and the parts of speech, have them randomly select one, and we put it in and read it. That was funny. Sometimes we would read the original poem with it and decide if we liked their version or my version or their version, the kids' version, better. Other times we would take out just a few random words and they would rewrite the poem using their own words, making meaning of the lack of words that were there by adding their own words. Sometimes we looked at that mentor text as well to see what their original was. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes we would talk about each other's instead and say, wow, look at all the different ideas here, all the different perspectives of why we chose these words, what it means to us. Quite often that comes back to their passion, so they could talk about it and they could explain that to me. I let the students choose the topic of some of their poems. Sometimes they could take that poem then and create it into a concrete, which is like the shape. So if I was writing about a cat, the outline of my poem would be in a cat. And they loved that one. They just thought that was a lot of fun. They collected all of their poems into a book and they had to turn that in to me. They would choose their very favorite. They would print that one and make it look all pretty and official and put that up for people to read at our Cookie Poetry Smash. And of course, that was super exciting. They did have to have all of their poetry book complete in order to go eat cookies. And I did have every single student turn in their book so that they could go. One of them was the very last minute, but they still got it in and they still got to go with their cookies. So that's pretty high turnout rate. We did include various types. Everybody had things like haikus and free verse, sonnet, limericks, the concrete one, the ballads, the odes, the elegies, the narrative, the prose, the couplets. Like the list just keeps going. So there was a list that they could choose from. Some of them had to be in there, but they just collected this book throughout the session. We did include some challenges like integrating specific words or figurative language. We've been working on the word ambiguous. So that could be a word I could throw into it this year. Talk to me about a poem and make sure you include the word ambiguous. Topic is your choice. I might guide them to look at something like an ode or an elegy or a narrative. That might be a little easier for them to get that word ambiguous in rather than a haiku. But if they're really talented or they're really good at this, we could say, all right, write me a haiku. Let's see you do it with the word ambiguous. You're including those challenges gets them excited, and having them go not necessarily against each other, but presenting their ideas got them really excited. Having them read their poetry aloud, whether we're talking small group or large group, that was really cool. Like they just loved this. So if you are watching this, please pause the video for a moment or two, look at all these tactics and decide which ones you think were used here. After that part of the poetry unit was done, I actually had a play on words. We had a book tasting, working with that food theme again, that universal need for sweets and things. We came into class and it was set up like this, looked like a restaurant. There were various books. They got to choose which book and verse they wanted to read. And inside of each book or at each table, there was a menu and it told about the specials of the day, which were these books. And so then they would pick their book according to their desires and their likes. And then they had to fill out a little form saying why they felt like this was a good match for them. So essentially, explaining why you picked your choice at the restaurant. Something else that we do in my class a lot is playful practice, this idea of gamification. I use this a lot in reviews. I like to get them up and get them moving. One of my favorite is to use a looped scavenger hunt. This year, I'm hoping that we start this a little earlier and by the end, they can create a looped scavenger hunt because that is a lot of critical thinking and problem solving. And I think that is a skill that particularly this set of GT kids could handle. A looped scavenger hunt means that I have spots all over the room that they're going to be traveling to. So no matter which one they start at, if they do it right, they'll go around and answer every single one and wind up back at the same one they started at. I have enough of that there's only one or two students at a paper at a time, if it's done correctly. Generally, I didn't have more than about four. It is a little frustrating. Some of the kids got really, really lost. We did spend some time on it. We did a very simple concept in the beginning where they went from one to another, to another, to another, and worked that loop system before going on a scavenger hunt to refresh their figurative language skills. I use things that a kindergartner would be able to answer, like colors or shapes, simple math problems, really easy word problems that they could solve. Things I knew that they knew, so that that part would not be tricky. It was I'm going from here to there. Oh, I have to look for an answer, and I'm looking at all these different puzzles around the room. And I started, I think, with 5 in the beginning, so that it was really easy for them to navigate. I showed them how to do it, had a couple of different students do it, and then I set them loose to try the whole class do it. Then we went to our looped scavenger hunt. But now they know how to do it, we could do that more often. Again, I'm working toward getting them to write it themselves and take that next step. So hopefully this year. Assessment, I use student-generated games all the time. This one takes a little bit more scaffolding, and if you're interested, I'm going to hopefully get this up on my website for you if this is something you're interested in. But you're looking for that range of depth of knowledge. You don't want just recall. Your questions could be recall, like list 5 characters in the book, or name that particular monster who did whatever they did. That skill and concept, we're looking for our context clues, classifying, inferring. Strategic thinking is those connections and critiquing. And that extended thinking is more critical thinking, that analyzing, applying concepts. I want to make sure that I have all of those levels. One, it helps me get through all of my students, but it also gives the kids so that they don't get overwhelmed with just these analyzing, extended thinking questions. And it makes the game move a little faster because if it's all extended thinking, you're going to be there forever. You do have to make sure that everything has a really clear connection to your learning goals. So as they're building the game, I have them double check, hey, is that meeting our learning goals? And they have to prove to me why or why not. And then our questions, we do the same thing. And we come back together and they have some peer reviews on that. Having a peer review means that they are thinking critically and talking critically to other people, and they have to internalize what other people said and make changes. One of the things that they do is integrate technology, which means that they can learn those new skills. Scenario-based learning is another way they can add some of that depth. Then they have to create their own rules. And so creating your rules, that's hard. Maybe I understand it, but can I get this person to understand it and this person to understand it? And what if I have 3 people together? Are they going to understand it? So there's a lot of iteration going on there, and it takes a lot of time. That peer feedback, again, is super important. And then this gives us adaptive challenges, choice-based learning. So we have this personalized learning experience. And they're passionate about it, right? Because it becomes theirs. It's something that they own. Here are some examples of some gamification mechanics. One that I'm looking at using this year in particular is this idea of a streak and leveling up. If you hit so many streaks, which the kids are all about, I think you have to go to Snapchat or something every day so you can get the biggest streak. They're all about it right now in my school. I'm like, great, let's use that. Let's get the kids to class. Let's get them turning in their stuff. That's their streak. Then we can move up levels. When we get enough badges, because we've moved enough levels, we can have like a free day, or we can earn a party or something. We could also battle. I could have challenges between two classes. There's so many options of how to do this. You just need to know your students, your class, your comfort level, and pick what works for you. If you want to take some time and look at this slide, there's a whole lot of elements of gameplay and design that foster learning. And over here on the left are a bunch of resources, a bunch of people who are the leaders right now in gaming research. They'd be great for you to check out. Now you know how to do some of this research. You know some of the basic mechanic names. So as you're digging and searching, you can see if this is something you're passionate about. Student-led or created assessment. So up on the top here, you see these two different games. One looks like a drawing and then one is an actual game. This is actually what brought me to the research that I found about what our students are needing, because a GT group, they just read through Percy Jackson so very quickly and they were bored. It's like, hey, listen, I would like to create a game for our final assessment. Would you like to help me with that process? Here's where it gets tricky, because they said yes, they were super excited, they took over, I let them run it, and the goal was for them to create a template so that other people could see what they did and then create their own games. So everybody would be creating their own game, or little groups would be creating a game. Well, the students took this and ran with it, and instead of everybody creating a game, these GT students created the game. They introduced it to the students, and then they gave each person a job. So if you look, you can see like here in the middle, right here, you see this is Medusa, her headpiece. This is a book. I think there's like a water bottle over here that signified water. Some did better than others. There's a hook here that signified one of the characters. So the students were assigned a cabin, and they had to work together as a cabin to solve the problems. And they each were responsible for bringing artifacts for their cabin. And they'd have to explain how they met up with their cabin, what they meant. And then they went through this life-size game. Each student was required to participate in creating 3 different questions at different levels. So that depth of knowledge, I used Costa's levels of questioning to do that. You could use the other as well. And so as they played the game, they had to work their way through. And some of it was just that recall. Some of it was their ability to synthesize, and some of it was their ability to connect it to their own world or outside sources. I did learn that some people do not like games. And so probably I should have given another option of not doing anything at all with the game other than playing with it, because I very much believe that if you're a family, you support each other. So if we'd had an essay, we would have listened to that essay or looked over that essay and helped them. And the gameplay, we would have played the game together. So that's something for me to take with me this time. Those life-size games, they love it. Gets them out of the classroom. I actually had to book a different classroom because I needed the space and to be able to leave this up for 2 days. Something else you could do is put a character or somebody on history, a math problem, a chemical. How cool would it be to find out if a chemical did or did not complete the crime because of their abilities? Because we put them on trial. So if you look down here in this bottom left here, this is my class. They're doing a Poe, the short story of the Telltale Heart. They're trying to determine if the main character is not guilty by reason of insanity, or if he's guilty because he knew what he was doing. So we had 2 different sets of attorneys. I have a bunch of witnesses. We had a judge. This was great because I could create special roles. I have a student who really liked to draw, wasn't engaged in a lot of other things. That person became our court reporter. Their responsibility was drawing whatever was happening in our class. I had another one who wrote for the newspaper, and so they would take notes every day, take some pictures, take the drawings that we had, and put together the compilation. At the end, they were responsible to write a little news article saying, this is what happened, here's the outcome of our trial. It was super fun. Another one that we did is a reenactment of a script that they wrote and produced. We read The Mask of the Red Death by Poe, which is great for right now because it talks a lot about things that they're familiar with from COVID, right? It was this horrible plague that killed a lot of people. However, it also has a lot of symbolism and a lot of deep meaning that gets really lost on the kids as they're reading it. So they read it together, we analyzed it, they did some highlighting, and then they were put into groups by each of the rooms. And the students took this on and they became passionate about it. As you can see, they loved their masks. They were super impassioned about their masks. Several of them used more than they were supposed to because they were so excited about it. They used all their math skills in creating different artifacts. I did actually have a big clock that is in there. They became impassioned about their characters and took on their own personas all on their own. Now, I had very few parameters around this. The whole play lasted less than 5 minutes. It was so fun. I even had one student who's like, hey, I don't want a fake sword in our play. I don't want it made out of cardboard. I don't want it made out of foam. So he went over and learned to design a sword, a 3D printed sword that would actually pull out and then collapse back on itself. Really, really cool. So that passion took them way beyond what I was planning on them doing. And then we also had some competition here. I bought some little statues, the little bobblehead pose, and it was called the Poe. So we had two groups that went against each other, and neither myself or the other eighth grade teacher were the judges. We had some outside parents and other staff that came in and judged. And I had told my class, I really hyped it. I was like, we are winning these Poes. I want them. I want them in our classroom. And we did win our two. So woohoo, go us. That competition was fun. And the kids who are not super competitive, that was fine because they could blend a little more in the background. Like this was great because it met all their depth of feelings and emotions. Our playful expression, we use this a lot in my classes. They love to annotate with colors. That's a super easy thing I can give them. Hey, we're going to annotate today. Let's use green for this. Let's read it again and we'll look for pink is now we're looking for those symbols. Can you highlight them in pink? This particular one was in 7th grade. We were talking about Martin Luther King and we were talking about peace, and they came up with some ideas of what peace meant to them and how we could be united or how we could make the world a better place. A positive message they wanted to give back to the world. They drew an example of it in the classroom. They worked in small groups, and then we came outside and spent some time out here. I had one student who took the entire time. He became quite the professional artist on this event. And actually, I don't know that I have his on here right now, but that one was neat because he didn't engage in a lot of things. And I totally let some of the other kids go play basketball because that one student and I were having this really deep conversation. I was getting things from him that I had not seen before, and I wanted that opportunity. I wanted that learning and that aha moment for him. So, if a couple kids got to play some extra basketball so that this child could have that learning moment, it's okay by me. The Dot and Ish are two great books if you are a person who's like, this sounds great, but I just have no idea where to start. I've used these in college and I've used them in middle school, and they would also work in elementary school. The dot is about a person who says, I can't draw, but I can make a dot. Eventually is what they come to. And then the teacher encourages them and says, okay, so if you can make a dot, what else can that dot become? And it's about this idea of thinking and bravery and original ideas and sharing. And there's another book by this author called called Ish. It's about getting unstuck and about creative teaching, exploring an idea in multiple ways. Like this whole divergent world is there. So these are two great books. In fact, the Dot has its own day. If you are interested in Dot Day, you could implement that into your classroom. It's one that you just search, and there's billions of ideas out there. Dot Day is passed, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. So if you're interested in those, there's two. This is one I use in my class. It's called Nada. Remember I was talking about when we were young, we love boxes and we play in them. That becomes our favorite toy. This story is about a rabbit who is sitting in a box, and somebody says, why are you sitting in a box? And the rabbit says, it's not a box. And we go through the story, and if you look at the pictures, you can see it. It's a pirate ship. It's a hot air balloon. It is the cage that you sit on when you're riding an elephant. It's a boat. It is anything but a box. I read this to my students on one of the first days of school, and I gave them a pipe cleaner. I said, your challenge is, this is not a pipe cleaner. What is it? And it was fun because most of them got to work right away. And the ones who didn't got so engaged in watching the other people that they kept going, and they created some really cool things. I did put a time limit on it just because you can't do it forever. And what do you do with your students who are quick and they're done? So after 2 days, we kind of capped it and said, hey, if you want to come back during free time, you're welcome to come back and keep working on it. But these are still up all over my room. So this little piggy came from one little pipe cleaner, and I just thought it was so cute. I had a lot of really great examples to choose from. This one was just a really fun one this year. I ended this little unit with them writing a clear paragraph about why their pipe cleaner is not a pipe cleaner and explaining what it was. I didn't have any complaints about writing that one either. They were so invested because they had become passionate about whatever they made. And that was a really neat experience. Then throughout the year, I throw back in this particular divergent. It's not a whatever, it's what is it? Just to throw that back in there as a bell ringer or a activity filler or a we need a break kind of a thing. And this one has been really fun. Genius Hour and passion projects have been something that I love. Last year, we took this on with a bunch of seventh graders. It was a whole month long, and I just kept thinking, did I give them too much time? And they're researching it, they're coming up with a topic. And we even had to explore, what are you passionate about? And it took some time for some of them to get there, to understand that a passion doesn't mean it's the only thing you think about. It can just be something you're interested in and see where it goes. We had one student who made cotton candy. She started with a recipe and then she wanted to know, well, can I make cotton candy by crushing up other candies? And so she did. She crushed up a variety of different candies and made that into cotton candy. This young man here on the bottom wanted to braid and his hair, and I kept thinking, are you being serious? He's kind of a clever child and one who likes to pull laughter from the classroom. And I thought, are you being serious about this? And I'm glad I really didn't say anything because he was very serious about it. He would come in and he had worked on all kinds of different braids and problem solved that he needed some yarn to practice on because nobody's hair was long enough, or if it was, maybe they couldn't be used right now because they're working on their own project. So he actually had long strands of hair taped to him that he would braid, and he had short strands. One day he decided he needed eyebrows, as you can see. This was really cool because he was passionate about it. He got other students passionate about it. We had boys all over the school braiding each other's hair and the girls' hair, and the girls were braiding hair. That one passion just caught like wildfire. The cards are a young lady who decided she wanted to learn to paint. And so she painted a different scene on each one of these cards. And so she had an entire deck when she was done, which, man, that's quite an undertaking for a month. This young man wanted to learn to play the guitar. He struggled trying to find music. First, he thought it was going to be super easy. And one of the rules that we had agreed upon was you have to be working all the time. You can't be just screwing around. You can be watching YouTube videos if they pertain and you can prove to me why you're watching them. It's part of your research. And this young man just struggled with that a little bit. And so when I was asking him, like, what are you doing today? He'd say, well, I can't bring in my guitar, or I'm not going to bring it in. And so like, okay, well, how are you going to practice it here? And I never came up with a solution. That was on them. What he came up with was this idea of he took the cardboard and created the neck of the guitar so that he could practice the fingering. He came back this year and was like, I learned so much over the summer because that passion project got me started on something I really wanted to learn. This end one is a young man who had a bow and arrow, which he can't bring into school, but he wanted to have a demonstration. He wanted to be able to show the other students what he was talking about, and he didn't want to just have a picture up on the board. So he created a bow and arrow out of a paper clip and a toothpick and a rubber band. And then as he was explaining things, the students could manipulate their own little projects. And I think originally he was going to have everybody create one, but it took him so long and he didn't have all the supplies that he decided he would use a big picture, have them come and look at this smaller one. And then he had Oreos as the targets and they could come and practice and tell him about it as they were shooting their Oreo. And then they got to eat their Oreo. Using mentor text for transformation is a great idea. For example, we started with a riddle and we just worked on a riddle. The next day I gave one that had multiple options. Sometimes I don't even tell them the answer and they tell me if they're right or they're wrong. They don't always love that, but they're getting used to it. Then we eventually have them write their own riddle. We swap them and have them answer each other a riddle, and then they have to explain why they got their answer to the riddle, and the original person explains why they got the answer that they gave, that they created. Then we have them write a riddle that is specific to our unit. So they still have flexibility and freedom within that, and it's still their poem, and they are just challenged then to do it within whatever their subject is. After a week or so, we moved to a bigger puzzle, like a logic puzzle that is more complicated. And once they solve that, then we move on and move that into whatever we're working on. Totally could do with this with math. You could use like, what shapes are we using to build something? What angles do we need? You could talk about science and be your elements, what's needed to create a specific chemical reaction. Are we reviewing combinations of the periodic table? Like, what social studies, different places, there's all kinds of things that we could use this for. Let me show you an example. This is from the learning hypothesis. This is one that we use this year as one of our mentor texts. So the next step, once they solve this, would be to take it and make this connect to the book that we're reading. So they're going to change out the characters, they're going to change out the story to create a new problem for other people to solve. It takes a lot of thought and concentration, and it takes some research, right? Like particularly in this one, if they were writing this one, I would have had them research like, what can vampires do that other people can't? Okay, they can turn into a bat, which means they can fly. Well, if they can fly, they and the witch can fly too, then what can those two potentially do that nobody else can do? Okay, now write that in as a clue. And so it's guided. I don't give them the answers and I don't tell them what to do, but it's a guided process. I like to include the unexpected. For example, I think it'd be so fun. I did this as an elementary student, and we would do it for National Reading Week. The alarm would go off, and everybody would have to stop right where they were and drop everything and read for maybe it was only 10 or 15 minutes, but I think it was 20. Getting out of the classroom, using objects in new, unusual, or unintended ways. They love that. They like to tell me how wrong I am, and then they like to see what other ways they can use it in. This one gets hard. We set some rules, like you can't destroy it. It has to be able to be used in its intended way again when you're done, unless I'm doing something specific like a straw. And then they can do whatever they want to with it. If it didn't work out, that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. Those informative, reflective pieces, the change up the classroom and the learning environment. I did that a lot. I do that when we are moving to different parts of our unit. So for example, if we're doing a Socratic seminar, I'll rearrange them. Our courtroom was rearranged. I like to hide things and let them discover them. Like I just never tell them that they're there. So for example, I have ducks hidden around my room, just teeny tiny little ducks, because one day I thought, if I was bored, I would want something to do. And so I hid a couple of ducks around the room. Well, students that started finding them were like, how many are there? So I had students who would make lists and identify where they were. And then they'd come in and start checking if they were still there. And then other kids would start hiding them. I did have some get stolen as well. This year, some of my class, my 7th grade, they took it even farther. They were like, we should have the ducks on a mission. And so there's this mission happening. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it'll ever be accomplished, but I have ducks hanging from the ceiling. And the 8th graders came in and they're like, what is going on? Why are these ducks all being hung? And I said, well, hey, if they don't answer it, you guys could have the ducks do the mission. And so I think before too long, those 8th graders are going to come up with what the mission is, complete it, and then move it on. So there'll be this little challenge between the 7th grade and the 8th grade. That's really fun because once they start to discover things, they're like, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. How long have these been here? Well, they've been here the whole time. It's really fun. And then of course, movement is really important to a lot of students, and they don't get that as much in some of our, like math. Maybe you don't have that as much. You might figure out ways to add that. Limitations is one. If we were in a class together, this is one you could do. This is just a little story that I wrote up. It says, you and 2 friends are on a walk. As you walk, you come to a river of lava. You see no way across it, so you decide to turn back. You move only 1 step before noticing a lion in your path. Looking at your friends, you remember that one of them has on magic lava boots. Now, they weren't planning to walk on lava. They just happened to match the outfit. So what a lucky day for you. Looking back over the river, you see a beautiful valley. How will everyone get to safety? If we were together, so if you'd like to pause the video and think about this for a couple minutes, come with a solution. That's what I would have them do. There's always questions, and I'm pretty ambiguous with my answers. I don't really say a lot. It comes down to their limitations and beliefs. The solution is they change their limitations. They're the ones that added the limitations, so they need to take them out. They've got to change what you believe. Friends, this is a hypothetical story, and in a hypothetical, unreal situation, we can do whatever we want. So what is your reality? I use this on my students all the time, actually. They'll ask me something and I'll say, that's interesting. I didn't put that limitation on. Are you going to put that limitation on yourself? And then they'll think about it and they'll come back and forth. But because I've created that environment where it's safe to fail, and they know that even if they get an F, they're not going to fail the class, they can redo it, or it's more about the process than the end outcome on some of our experiences that we're working on. They feel safe to say, oh, yeah, I don't have to put that limitation. And then they come back with something else totally different. Let me show you a couple examples that we did with Poe. Poe died in a mysterious way. Nobody really knows how he died, but there's a ton of suspects, a lot of different potential ways that he died. So our students, when we are learning about Poe, walk around and gather evidence, and they have witnesses that they interview or gather information from. They come back and they create a detective board, and then they have to make sense of that and then they give a conclusion that is as logical as they make it, right? It has to tie together enough that other people can follow it, but really it's whatever their brain creates, and they write the information only. So it's an objective summary or an objective piece that they are giving me just information. Another one that we do down here in the bottom corner, you see students doing a live clue game. We're introducing another piece from Poe. This one is the Mask of Montiago, where there's a person who is upset with another person and winds up killing them. Well, I didn't tell the students what this was. I didn't tell them how people die. In fact, we just finished a game of Clue and moved on to the piece that we were reading. I never even made that connection for them. As we were reading it, a few people kind of thought, oh, this piece goes along with our Clue game. And this piece kind of goes along with our clue game, but they didn't put it together until we watched a little video of a reenactment of it. Now, we could have done another reenactment, but we were running out of time for our unit. We'd already done a reenactment. And what I was hoping would happen is exactly what happened, that all of a sudden they're watching the movie and they're like, oh my gosh, this is our thing. I know what happened. Whether they were right or wrong in their clue game didn't matter. It was the process that they took. Could they tell me why they took that process? And then here, they had the opportunity to look at it again and be like, oh, I see how that could be. What was particularly interesting about this one is I had one student who struggled a lot. They weren't always as engaged. And they got the right answer. They figured out the murder, and they were one of the few, and they got a lot of flack for it. But when it happened in the video, all of a sudden, his ability to understand things and his ability to feel that intelligence level of I can do this shot through the roof because he got it. He got it when other people who are defined as GT didn't. Other people who are defined as a smart kid didn't. And that was just such a great aha moment for him of, wow, I can do this. I am smart. It was a really, really cool moment. Other places that you can add in some practice. Again, we're not looking for big changes here. Add in a mini lesson or an experience with divergent thinking practice in your bell ringers or your to-do nows, your launches, your exit tickets. Add in a couple of game mechanics. Have the students do it. They get really excited about this. We get to teach it to them, and then they can take over and have that autonomy and be empowered to be that leader for us. It takes that beginning practice, but once you get it going, it's pretty impressive what they can do, especially your GT. Push them, let them take over for you. I'm not going to go over these with you because we are very much running out of time, but here are a couple examples of some bell ringers with the low floor, high ceiling, no right answer, but it makes them think. Now, you would not want to stop here. You'd actually want to take these a step further and move it into whatever you're talking about, but this is where we start. These are the kind of things. Which one doesn't belong? And then they're telling you why it doesn't belong. Again, with a mathematical equation. What's the similarities? Here's another one. Divergent doodles or the nadas. Give them an object and say, this is not a paperclip. What is it? This is not a stapler. What is it? And if you're looking at the example, it's those little chomper teeth things that move around. I thought of bunnies with those big front teeth the first time I saw it. Your divergent doodles, you start them with the dot, or you start them with a triangle, or you start them with three things and say, okay, put these together and create me a new shape. Students are really good at this, and it takes just a couple of minutes. I notice and I wonders, or I know and I wonder. So they're looking at an item, they're reading a small snippet of words, and there's not a right answer or a wrong answer. You're just talking about what you notice. Would you rathers are a great one. Try and think of things that might correlate to what you're talking about. If you're talking about money, maybe you're talking about a business wage, you could talk this one, work as a server at a restaurant or work as a server at restaurants. So you've got two different restaurants. Restaurant A, they make $18 per hour with no tipping. The meals are about $8 to $25 each. And restaurant B are $10.50 per hour, but they get tipped. And the meals range from $8 to $25. So the only change is how much they get paid and if they get tipping. Why would you want that? Super interesting, the conversations that come up from this. And they pull on that prior knowledge. Some of them maybe have worked at a restaurant, or some of them have siblings who do. And so they have these great conversations that occur naturally from would you rathers. All right. These were some content specific examples. They can be applied to any content area by tweaking them. My goal for you today is to write down one. If you try and implement all of these, your mind will explode. But just pick one thing that you'd like to implement over the next week. or take an idea back and talk with your peers about how you can implement that into your content area. That divergent thinking, it's going to take some practice for you too. Remember, you have an adult brain, and that convergent thinking is super heavy on us. So think about how you can simple implementation, not hard, not complicated, not for weeks, just a simple implementation. And if you still have questions, contact me. I would love to know what you're trying to do and see if I can help you. I would like to leave you with this thought. There's a story about a person who was stuck in a net, and another little girl comes and finds them and says, "Hey, who are you?" And the person in the net says, "I'm Annette." And when they get them down, they say that their name has changed. And the little girl says, "I thought you were Annette." And the person says, "Well, that was only because I couldn't remember who else I might be. It never occurred to me to be a," and they go on to list off, but this is my thought for you. We don't remember who else you could be. So today, remember. And who might you be? Who could you be today? I encourage you to think about that, and I encourage you to take that back to your kids, because a lot of us just don't remember who else we could be. And it might just occur to us to be a genius. I'd love it if you take a minute to fill this out and leave me some feedback. If you'd like to connect, if you want to talk to me about what would be most helpful on my website for you, I would love to know. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you got something out of this, and I hope we meet again. Have a great day.